So Season 2 of Devil May Cry on Netflix dropped at midnight, and no kidding, I stayed up all night binging the whole damn thing. I don't talk about a lot of shows on my channel, but Devil May Cry is one of my favorite gaming franchises, period. So, I'm going to talk about the show. But looking at my boring face while I talk about the show is not terribly engaging, and I'll probably get DMCA'd so fast it would make your head spin clean off if I put up clips of the show already. So here's some mediocre gameplay of me playing Devil May Cry 5. Now, as this video progresses, you're going to notice that my speech pattern changes a lot because it's much more specifically scripted than the early portions. I binged Season 1 in one day, just the same way I did with this. And while Season 1, you kind of felt like you could get away with watching it without being familiar with the lore, Season 2 is a tougher sell on that part. Season 2 Episode 1 throws a lot at the viewer very, very quickly. And if you are familiar enough with Devil May Cry lore, like I am, you can see where a lot of it is going to go right off the bat. And before I get too deep into the story, I want to talk about a couple of things real quick that I think are less demanding of my time if I'm going to talk about this show. The first of which is the acting. Everyone's great. Johnny Young Bosch, Scout Taylor Compton, Robbie Damon, newcomer Graham McTavish, and filling in for the late Kevin Conroy is Ian James Corlett, who a couple of times shot out some line deliveries that I did a double take on because I could have sworn I heard Kevin. I'm still kind of adjusting, even after 2 seasons, to having Johnny Young Bosch play Dante because he's so established as Nero in the main line of games. It would have been pretty cool to have just a total newbie play Dante, someone I've never heard of. And maybe we'll get that with Nero further down the line. Every once in a while, you'll come across an actor who you think to yourself, oh, they are not just acting, they are just chewing the ever-loving hell out of this script and loving every moment of it. That goes to Graham McTavish as Arias, who I will extensively talk about as a character further down the line. But Graham crushed it playing this. We also get a couple of veterans, one of which is also the late Tony Todd, chipping in as Beowulf, and D. Bradley Baker, who just comes out of nowhere with his 700-plus acting credits as Goliath and a couple of other smaller lackeys. I feel by and large that the actors did a really good job. I have really no issues with the acting in this show so far. I'm going to spoil this whole show, so if you haven't watched it yet, don't watch me, you can come back later. For a couple of flashback sequences, we do get Hoon Lee back as White Rabbit, and he's just as good as he was last year. Season 1 ended with our introduction to Robbie Damon's Virgil, and he is all over the season here. And while I'll get to some of the writing and character consistencies and choices regarding specifically Virgil a little bit down the line, Robbie Damon does a really good job voicing the character. His acting sold me. The next thing that I don't need to take too much time to talk about is the animation. Studio Mir did a great job. There are a couple of shots here and there that you're like, oh, that is not a lot of frames per second, but that might not even be Studio Mir's choice. By and large, the show looks great. Now getting to the story and characters, because that is absolutely the meat and potatoes of this video. Now, I've seen Castlevania, the Netflix series. I've not seen Nocturne. I've never played a Castlevania game. I don't think I've even passively played one. I don't think I've even tried. Devil May Cry, I have played all of, except for the mobile game, because I'm not a monster. Now, when it comes to comparing the two series, I'm not going to do that on a particularly thorough level, but I am going to say the characters and the conflict presented in Castlevania, I feel like made it overall more accessible to casual viewing. And if I have to pick one over the other at this current juncture, I would pick Castlevania. Season 1 of Devil May Cry was pretty conventional in terms of its plot progression, but Season 2 I feel like is a little less friendly to the casual viewer. And what's crazy about that is that the shell for this lore is also the game with the least going on, Devil May Cry 2. I don't know if maybe this is just secretly Adi Shankar's favorite of the franchise. I've been through it, I want to say 3 times. I have it. Yeah, this was part of my life growing up. I got these when I was in high school, back when it didn't take 78 years to make a video game. But using this as the meat and potatoes for your show, it's a choice a lot of people were really skeptical about. Not that Devil May Cry 2 has no lore, and mashing characters like Mundus and Virgil into the shell of Devil May Cry 2 is kinda surreal. It's the only game out of the main 5 games that Virgil has nothing to do with. Absolutely zero. But like I said, if you're familiar with the games, you know where the show's going pretty quickly. Is Jester who you think he is, even though for some reason he's like absolutely ginormous in this show? Yes, he is. He's exactly who you think he is. The show sets up that Argosax was Ava's killer. Or was it maybe a ploy by Mundus? Yes, of course, it was a ploy by Mundus. In my last video, in my thumbnail, I made a caption that said, "This show is Argosax." What I meant by that was that this is clearly kind of a conglomeration of all the different elements of all the games, which is literally what Arsax is at one point in Devil May Cry 2. It is just this fleshy amalgamation of a bunch of previous bosses that eventually evolves into this angel, demon, androgynous fire person that you fight. What I did not know until I actually started watching the show is that the primary antagonist of this season turns out to be Argosax. Yes, ultimately the main villain of Devil May Cry 2 breaks out of the case and onto the screen. And while there is a lot of background lore in Devil May Cry 2, not a lot of plot progression necessarily happens on screen, which means there's a lot of room to play with here. Like, I think one of the wackiest bits they played with is at one point we see that Arius has the Sparta sword. Now, who do you think would wield this sword the most throughout the show? Would it be Arius? Virgil? Dante? Strangely enough, one of Arius' secretaries puts it to good use. Okie doke, okay. Even with all of this reworking, Argosax ends up being really thin as a villain. He just wants destruction and chaos and to rule and all of those conventional things. Mundus as sort of a still oppositional force, but not, I would say, primary antagonist. Not yet. He fares better, but not by a whole lot. Finding out that he's Ava's actual killer is no surprise. For having this season be so heavily centered on the lore and events of Devil May Cry 2, strangely absent is Lucia, who they straight up showed at the end of Season 1 as if she was going to be a part of the story moving forward. We see neither height nor hair of her in this season. Nothing. But it still uses some moments that are ripped right out of the games. It uses the coin switch of the Medallia from Devil May Cry 2. It even rips a bit of fight choreography straight from Devil May Cry 5. Now, the two most notable additions to the show this season are Virgil and Arius, and seeing them fight each other is kinda surreal. And I think it's pretty fun having characters like this who never came close to meeting each other in the original lore come together here, and it pushes me to follow up on what I said in my last video, and this is something that I'm kind of passionate about talking about when it comes to any kind of adaptation. It's just the idea of what an adaptation is. To me, the heart of a good adaptation is taking the established characters and putting them in new stories or revised stories. Because if what you're doing is called an adaptation, but it's a new story and new characters, is it really an adaptation, or is it just kind of sort of fan fiction? A quote from the Devil May Cry wiki states that the events of the series were deliberately placed in an alternate timeline to the original games, as showrunner Adi Shankar admitted he wanted to focus more on, quote, the essence of the characters than the essence of the original games. Some of it is dead on, some of it is, So let's just go through some of these real quick. First off, is Dante Dante? This feels like a younger Dante. The Dante that I know takes literally everything in stride until it comes to his family, and that's mostly intact here, but this Dante still feels pretty young and like he's figuring out who he's going to be. This Dante, in terms of attitude, harkens closer to the Devil May Cry 3 Dante, right down to the surfing on a rocket. Is Lady Lady? This season she's closer. Less weird oddball swearing. At one point she even tells a kiddo later to stop swearing and it's bad. She gets her cool white outfit and we get something a bit closer to what we remember. But to me, more interesting is the question, is Arius Arius? Arius had almost no character in Devil May Cry 2. He wasn't just paper thin, he was like rice paper thin. And this series had the chance to more or less build him from the ground up. And like I said, Graham McTavish just bit into that script and did such a good job with this role. For one, he's Scottish now. Don't know why, but he is, and you know what? I'm into it. The Scottish brogue mixed in with the delicious delivery of so many of his lines works so well. I don't object. Eventually, we learn more about his character and come to find out that he has been alive for 28 consecutive lifetimes. This is an interesting plot point. I will get to it when I talk more about the story. But that being said, while Arius here is a massive improvement on the source material, in some ways the story doesn't serve him in any way that makes him relatable beyond what he endures from his father. He's not a villain that we look at and say, okay, yeah, I get it. He might be at first, but then if you stop and think about it, less and less so. Is Virgil Virgil? This is an interesting one to me because this Virgil has one particular aspect that is a radical departure from the original lore in that he was raised by Mundus. In Devil May Cry 3, he separates from Dante and stays in the underworld to fight with Mundus and loses. After his defeat, he is brainwashed into becoming Milo Angelo. In this version, he's not really brainwashed in the same way. He's not broken by Mundus before becoming his servant. He is raised by Mundus. Mundus gives him the Yamato. Mundus gives him his signature blue jacket. And in raising him to be his right-hand man, Virgil even takes on some roles as an emissary of some sorts at a point, which causes him to do some things that don't quite feel like Virgil, like hopping onto a talk show to call out Arius live to the world. That feels like something 2013 DMC Devil May Cry would do. And while thankfully these versions of Dante and Virgil are not comparing dick sizes, at least not yet, it seems that this version of Virgil is still not entirely free of DMC 2013's shadow. I mean, fantastic gameplay, don't get me wrong. What a wacky story, dog. When the season has the inevitable conclusion that pits Dante and Virgil back against each other at the last minute, Virgil tells Dante that he's choosing Makai, the demon world, over Earth as far as his loyalty is concerned and what he considers to be home. But right after that, Virgil turns to Mundus and says Makai will invade Earth, but it's going to be with me as the ruler. This is something that makes me feel like this version of Virgil is not entirely Virgil. The reason I feel like this doesn't work is because it strips the conundrum of Virgil away. It's not about ruling, it is about protecting. His need to protect is born from immense loss, and though he is very calculative about how to ascertain power, he is inarticulate about what he is going to protect once he has that power. Now, he still has a ton of badass moments and some dialogue ripped straight out of the games that drops at just the right moments. Mundus raising Virgil is less effective, because stripping Virgil's identity as a son of Sparta when he already had an identity was more intimidating and set Mundus up as a more frightening presence than having Mundus be like a pseudo-father figure. It's the idea that Mundus could break Virgil when Virgil already had so much conviction. This Virgil is much more a part of Mundus's game. Definitely more of a talker than most other previous iterations. Again, perhaps sans 2013. Now, another character who kind of gets the shaft, and she's only in a portion of one episode, but I want to talk about her, is Goldstein. Now, I'm a nerd, and I read both of the novels, Devil May Cry 1 and 2, that came out in the late aughts. And in one of these books, we meet Goldstein. She is the gunsmith that eventually comes up with the ebony and ivory for him. In the books, she has such a hard time making guns for him because Dante can just shoot way too fast. The barrels melt, the guns come apart, the pieces don't hold together. But in this version, she doesn't have to be the best in her field, because it turns out that the guns are made from Machian metal, demonic metals, substances not of this world. So she didn't have to be the best. She just had to be decent. And you know what? I feel like that kind of shot my gal in the foot. They neutered my gal a bit, because she should be the best at what she does. I mean, those are the characters I want to talk about for now, but I'm going to move on at this point to the story. The development cycle for Devil May Cry 2 was infamously cut short, resulting in a game that in a lot of ways just did not flow well. Combat was far too simplified and the story was semi-present. The lore remains intact. Many, many years ago, Mundus defeated Argosax the Chaos and personally guards one of the Arcana, one of 4 ancient relics that act as a seal to keep Argosax at bay. And of course, an eclipse is coming up, so we're on a time crunch right off the bat. Arius, as a servant of Argosax, goes on a multi-lifespan crusade to find the Arcana, resurrect Argosax, and this is one of the things I want to harp on a little bit. Part of the story with Arius here is that Arius, as a servant of Argosax, goes on a multi-lifespan crusade to find the Arcana and resurrect Argosax. This is one of the issues I have with this character, and the issue I have doesn't even pertain to the lore outside of this series. We find out that Arius lived 28 consecutive lifetimes because Argosax blessed him or granted him this gift as a follower, so that every time he would die, his soul and his memories would pass to the nearest newborn baby boy, I guess. Which means he didn't have just one abusive dad. This guy had possibly up to 28 dads. And the show wants me to believe that none of them, or his mothers, made him believe in the good in humanity? Over the course of these 28 lifetimes, Arias lands on the idea that the best way forward and the best catalyst for innovation is chaos. 56 parental figures and not one of them made him see the good in humanity? Come on, dog. The war between America and hell, I guess, escalates to a point where Dante is needed. Virgil is drawn out of the demon realm and into the human realm, which causes him and Dante to fight because it's the law. But mutual interest in stopping the return of Argosax brings Dante, Virgil, and Lady together, and to Fortuna. It's a little hint of some Devil May Cry 4 dropping in there. You see that? See the Devil May Cry 4 they're sprinkling in? As things progress, a side quest involving one of the worst bosses in the franchise, the Trismagia, reveals to Virgil that Mundus was indeed Ava's killer. Soon enough, Arias gains all of the Arcana and brings hell to Earth in the form of Argosax. However, the margin for Argosax becoming too strong for Dante and Virgil to handle seems to be a couple dozen or so humans, so they resort to using the Sparta Sword to bring Argosax across the plane over to Mundus before he can get any stronger. Mundus again defeats Argosax and Arias seems to die? I don't know. It's possible that Arias may have moved over to one last body. But as Virgil goes to reclaim the Sparta, Dante objects, and they fight again in a really well done, albeit brief sequence where we see that despite Dante's innate talents, Virgil bests him in one-on-one combat. Virgil blasts Dante back to Earth and tosses the amulet from the Sparta to him so that the worlds are sealed from each other once again. A none too pleased Mundus squares up with Virgil, and the victor between the two is left ambiguous. So I'm assuming Virgil will now be reinitiated into Mundus's fold by force, with a brainwashing that's closer to what we saw in the games. And if you are wondering if Dante and Lady find some time in the middle of all this to the answer is yes. Now, this is all just a brief summary. Baines is hard at work with his own motivations, as is the American president, Hopper. We get a new character named Tom, a Darkholm soldier who works with Lady after his nerves cause him to make some really poor choices. We also get who are, as far as I'm aware at the moment, original characters in Dr. Lucan and his granddaughter Maddie, who aid Dante in some of the more magical elements of the story. There's also a lot of really quick, semi-significant cameos from some of the bosses throughout the franchise. Most significant is Beowulf from Devil May Cry 3. We also get a bit of Goliath in Episode 1 and a quick shot of Nevin. But the only ones here worth diving into at all are Beowulf and especially Trismagia, who I think was a bit of a misfire. The Trismagia is teased as a creature who confronts someone with hard truths that threaten to break their spirit. Virgil is confined to a realm where the only way out is through Trismagia, and its design could have led to such a unique character. 3 faces adorn its floating head, but here we don't get the distinction that the Trismagia is 3 characters of 3 minds and 1 body. The Trismagia, even when each face speaks, feels like a single character. It's just played too generically, and once Virgil rather easily overcomes the truths that are presented to him, they just try to kill him instead. Beowulf doesn't seem to have his Sparta-related Devil May Cry 3 bloodlust here, and just gets into these little verbal tiffs with Virgil, until in the last episode when Virgil just one-shots him, which, you know, fair enough. That's pretty in character. Overall, there are some character inconsistencies, even within the context of solely this show. Adi Shankar, for some of the flack he gets, he may not always have his finger on the pulse of the show, but it never felt completely detached to me. I don't really know what I think of Adi Shankar as a creator. His contributions to Castlevania as a whole feel ambiguous, and I know he garnered a pretty wacky reputation for saying some pretty radical things leading up to this show. But I mean, how does one exactly adapt Devil May Cry? The cutscenes for all of Devil May Cry 5 come in at just over 2 hours, while this season of television comes in at about 4.5. And no, not every choice feels completely true to the characters as we have come to know them, but I can certainly think of several avenues that this could have been far more egregious. We get the lawn chair. We get winks to the fact that Devil May Cry 2 is not the greatest that the franchise has to offer. The highlight of the series for me is a moment where Dante is trying to find his darker nature to tap in so he can get to his fullest devil trigger. And he has an imagined conversation between himself and his mother, Ava. And this is the highlight of the season for me. This moment, this moment filled my dark soul with light. I went back and watched this scene a couple of times. And that moment where Dante runs towards his mom and then it cuts and he's a little boy running to his mom again. Oh, dude, that was good. That was a good choice. The next big thing I want to talk about in this show is the music, which is not something I thought I was going to really talk about. But, you know, here we go. Devil May Cry stands out among a lot of video games in that it sort of breached over into the anime fandom as well. It had a separate animated series back in 2007, I believe it was. But the video games were not immune from having what are called AMVs made about them. If you're watching this video, you probably know, but covering my bases, AMVs are anime music videos. The franchise is not immune to them. Think 2001 to 2008, those kind of AMVs. Breakin' Benjamin, Evanescence, Drowning Pool. This show decided to take the songs that one would find in those AMVs and put them in some of its action scenes. And also Skater Boy by Avril Lavigne, because, I don't know, you, I guess. Hell, even as I write this script, not even 24 hours before Season 2 launched, the fandom has already put Season 2 AMVs up on YouTube. These people are fast as hell. But the series, both Seasons 1 and 2, use music as kind of a needle drop for plot progression at several points. And none of the music drops in Season 2 work quite as well as Afterlife did in Season 1. Unfortunately, the music drops actually gave me the heartiest laughs in the season. I'm kind of sad to say. The songs that came up in this are songs that, of course, I listened to and jammed to in high school. But they came up at such bizarre points that I couldn't help but kind of wonder if it was on purpose. Where some of these music videos, you're like, I get what you're going for, but this doesn't fit. This show does the same thing. I get what you're going for, but it doesn't quite fit. And it's not even necessarily the song that doesn't always fit. Sometimes it's the timing. I mean, Virgil is surrounded by dark calm enforcers. Yeah, sure. Throw in Bodies by Drowning Pool. It makes sense. It's two products of their time colliding with each other 20 years later. One scene slammed Evanescence's My Immortal down like a final Uno card, and it just about flash-naded me right in the cerebral cortex. Now that song could work for this show, but the moment that the song is utilized did not feel like the right moment to drop it. The song was thrown out at a moment that felt like it was meant to bolster the relationship between Dante and Lady, because it crescendos at their kiss, and right after that the credits roll, but the credits are not the same. The first 3 episodes, the ending credits, are bare scenery, as the end of My Immortal is playing, and right after a romantic, passionate kiss between Dante and Lady. That once bare scenery is now augmented to show the characters inhabiting it with all of the parents that they have lost. And it makes it feel like the song wants to serve 2 masters and relegates the apropos to the credits. If you're going to use your music to service the story, the relationship between Dante and Ava feels much closer to the heart and the intent of that song. My Immortal could have worked far better in a reworked version of the scene in episode 7 between Ava and Dante, a scene I am also mindful of playing with, as it was the highlight of the season for me. But I bring this up so distinctly because this felt like it was supposed to be the musical mic drop like Afterlife was in season 1. But it landed with a diluted impact because it hits us with a kiss and then cuts to the credits where it says, I miss my mom. Okay, but the bullet to the jukebox was fun. Fine, okay, you get a pass. And I think you know what song it played when Dante shot that jukebox. So when I say I have notes for this show, it's easy to think, oh, he didn't like it. I mean, no way, dude. I have notes because this is among my favorite action gaming franchises. I love the set pieces. I love the lore. I love the gameplay, which we all know is the real star of the franchise to begin with. So, I mean, do I recommend the show? Hell yeah. Hell yes, I do. It's not 100% accurate to the characters and who we know them to be. Dante and Virgil are nowhere near as strong as we have seen them in some of the games. And this season especially, like I said, it puts a lot on the table right away. But the show is still a really fun, 4.5-ish hour action romp where two mad lads and a sassy tomboy fillet demons with absolutely reckless abandon. The source material is played with, but adapting Devil May Cry 2 has the most room for growth to begin with anyways. Season 1 Episode 6 remains my personal highlight for me, and while this show may not hit the same highs for me so far that Castlevania did, I'm already looking forward to seeing what Season 3 has in store. It's imperfect and occasionally inconsistent in its character writing, though we're still short one Lucia and one Trish. But whatever Season 3 is going to be, I'm gonna be there day one to binge it. Adapting this was a bold choice, but plucking out a little of this and a little of this and just kind of working it into there, we got a season of TV that was actually pretty fun. And when you're adapting a franchise where the gameplay is certainly the star over the story, and I'm a huge story person too, I think it came out well enough. I don't think I've ever played a Devil May Cry game and said to myself, wow, that was a 10 out of 10 story. No, I walked away and said, that was 10 out of 10 gameplay. So no, we do not get a 10 out of 10 story here. I'm looking forward to seeing what comes next. I'm looking forward to seeing who, whether it's Season 3 or Season 4, who gets cast as Nero. I'm hoping it's someone new. I'm hoping it's someone we have never heard of before. I could do it. Put me in, coach. All right, my next video will probably just be another Craigslist one. But those are fun as hell.